Hello, Harvest Vineyard family. For most of the remainder of 2021, we will be journeying through Jesus' most famous teaching, the Sermon on the Mount. Last fall, we spent considerable time in a series called The King and the Kingdom, where we talked about how some want to have a king without a kingdom, and others want a kingdom without a king. We want both. There is a king, Jesus, and he has a kingdom, a reign, and a way of living under his rule that leads to flourishing. We just finished our 8-week series called The Blessed Life, where we studied the first part of the Sermon on the Mount called the Beatitudes. It was challenging and energizing for our church. As we encounter and surrender to Christ, we experience his life, give him our allegiance, and we learn to follow him together. We want to be people who take Jesus seriously. Our series on the Sermon on the Mount will be called The Way of Jesus. Many turn Jesus' words in the Sermon on the Mount into a set of oppressive laws. Others relegate it to another time because they say it's impossible to obey. And we say no to both. Jesus is showing us the way of the kingdom of God. In the Sermon on the Mount, we see key teachings from Jesus himself on how to walk this countercultural way of life, the way of the King. As he lives in and through us, he empowers us to live in his way and to live in the reality of God's present kingdom available to us right now. These teachings are accessed as a result of a life lived in, with, and from Jesus Christ. He models that, and he resources us for it. We want to allow Jesus' radical teaching to challenge and shape the way we live, knowing that a life shaped by him leads to flourishing, freedom, and life. The Sermon on the Mount concludes with a statement from Jesus that all who hear and do what he says will have a life that can stand up to everything. That is a life for eternity because it is already in the eternal. Here's Sarah Crum, Harvest's graphic designer, to tell you a little bit more about the artwork accompanying our sermon series.
When I first heard we were going to spend a year in the Sermon on the Mount, the big question that entered my mind was, what is it like to spend a year on the mountain with Jesus? The graphic for The Blessed Life started to explore this idea with its disorienting depiction of starting at the base of the mountain and looking up. Now, as we step into the rest of the year, I'm struck by the tensions in spending time with Jesus on the mountain, and this new design reflects that. The Sermon on the Mount is both convicting and yet hopeful, hard to swallow and yet rejuvenating, disorienting and yet grounding. The hopeful colors, asymmetry, shifted perspective, and ultimately the focus on Jesus in this design captures those tensions of spending a year with him on the mountain.
Prepare to be challenged and to be encouraged. Jesus doesn't sugarcoat anything. He addresses everything from prayer, fasting, and giving to anger and lust, worry, and judgment. We're invited to look at God, ourselves, and the world around us through his lens and to move forward in his way. And in doing so, we are led into flourishing, freedom, and life. Hear these words from Jesus from the end of the Sermon on the Mount. Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house. Yet it did not fall because it had its foundation on the rock. This is what we endeavor to do together as we pursue the way of Jesus this year.